chosen one, stop scrolling for a second. Not because I want your attention for views, but because what I'm about to tell you is the kind of thing heaven notices, and most people would miss it completely. This isn't a feel-good message you play in the background while you multitask. This is the kind of revelation that makes you sit up and think, wait, did that really happen to me? Because while I was preparing this, I felt something unusual, like the room went quiet in the spirit. And the truth is, it wasn't because of what you said. It was because of how you carried yourself. You did something recently that looked small on the outside. No announcement, no performance, no trying to prove a point. It came so naturally from the deepest part of who you are that you probably didn't even realize what you triggered in realms your eyes can't see. But heaven saw it, and not in a casual way, more like a pause, a turn, a focused attention. Because your attitude, yes, your attitude, left God speechless. And here's where it gets serious. This wasn't just God is proud of you. This was the kind of moment that made Archangel Michael take notice, the commander of heaven's armies, the one who doesn't get distracted, the one who doesn't stop for just anyone. Something about your response was so uncommon, so spiritually loud, that it demanded review. Not because you were perfect, but because you were powerful in the one moment most people collapse. So before we go any further, if you felt like something shifted inside you lately, like you crossed an invisible line, and you're not who you used to be anymore, type 777 in the comments. Let it be your witness in public that God is doing something in private. Now, stay with me, because in the next part, I'm going to show you the exact attitude you demonstrated that made heaven pause, why Michael specifically focused on your case, and what it means for what's about to unfold in your life from this point forward. God's chosen one, your attitude left. God speechless. Even Archangel Michael was stunned. Let me slow this down, because once you see what I'm about to show you, the rest of this message will finally click into place. In the unseen realm, there is always movement. There are angels assigned to protect, to guide, and yes, to observe. And what most people don't realize is that much of human behavior becomes almost predictable. I've learned that patterns repeat the same way storms repeat in certain seasons. Pain often produces bitterness. Betrayal often triggers revenge. Injustice usually invites anger. It's been that way for generations, and it's so common that it barely registers as unusual in the spiritual atmosphere. But every once in a while, something happens that does not fit the pattern. Very rarely, a soul responds in a way that contradicts human instinct so completely that it creates what I can only describe as a pause in the heavens, a kind of holy stillness where everything seems to lean in and watch. Have you ever had a moment where even you surprised yourself? A moment where you looked back afterward and thought, that wasn't just me. Something carried me through that. You created one of those moments. And I'm not saying this to flatter you. I'm saying it because I've seen enough of life to recognize when something is ordinary survival and when something is spiritual evidence. This wasn't long ago. It happened in one of your most difficult recent experiences, the kind that felt specifically designed to break you, like the pressure wasn't random, like the weight on your shoulders was measured out to see exactly when you would collapse. And the truth is, anyone watching your life would have understood if you had snapped. People would have excused it. They would have said, after what they did to you, who wouldn't react like that? That's what makes your response so uncommon, because I'm not talking about you simply surviving. Plenty of people survive. Some survive out of stubbornness. Some survive because they have no other option. Some survive while their heart turns cold and their spirit turns hard. Survival alone doesn't cause heaven to take notice. What you did was different. You were in a situation where you had every right to be bitter, every justification to hold on to anger, every reason to let resentment become your fuel. And this wasn't some imagined offense where someone felt disrespected. No, this was real pain, delivered through real circumstances, by real people, and it left a mark. If you had chosen to protect yourself by becoming sharp, distant, or ruthless, nobody would have questioned you. So why didn't you? This is where it gets spiritual. Because in that moment, when your human nature was screaming for you to match the energy you received, when the logical part of your mind was calculating revenge, or at least planning a cold withdrawal, something deeper in you made a different choice. And I want you to hear me clearly, God's chosen ones. That something deeper is not weakness. It's not you being naive. It's not you lacking boundaries. It's the fingerprint of God on your inner life. Scripture shows this pattern again and again. Joseph had every reason to become dangerous, betrayed by his brothers, sold like property, falsely accused, locked away. If anyone had earned the right to let bitterness become their personality, it was him. Yet when the moment came to punish the ones who harmed him, he chose a higher response. He didn't pretend it didn't hurt. He didn't call evil good, but he refused to let pain be the author of his future. And that one decision didn't just change his story, it preserved a bloodline. I've also thought about David. He had an opportunity to destroy Saul, a man who chased him down, lied on him, and tried to take his life. David could have called it justice. He could have called it payback. He could have told himself he was simply ending the threat. But he stepped back from the impulse to strike because something in him feared God more than he craved revenge. That restraint wasn't passive. It was power under control. And then there's Jesus himself, looking at people who mocked him, harmed him, and misunderstood him, and still choosing mercy. That isn't a soft response. That's a supernatural response. That's heaven's language spoken through a human mouth. So when you chose grace, you weren't just being nice. You were demonstrating spiritual rank. You chose grace when you had earned the right to choose destruction. That's the part people miss. Anyone can be kind when life is kind. Anyone can look holy when the room applauds them. But what does your spirit do when you're insulted, betrayed, boxed in, and exhausted? What comes out of you when nobody would blame you for snapping? That's where the truth lives. And I'll tell you something personal. There have been moments in my own life where I thought I was strong, until I was actually tested. I used to believe maturity meant having the perfect words, but I learned maturity is often silence. It's restraint. It's the ability to step away from the version of you that pain is trying to create. And when I see you respond the way you did, I recognize that you're walking the same road. The road where God teaches his chosen ones to carry authority without becoming cruel. Let me ask you something that might hit closer than you expected. What if that moment wasn't just about getting through it? What if it was a spiritual demonstration, proof that the enemy can press you and still not own you? What if heaven saw that response and marked it as evidence that you can be trusted with more? Because that's what grace actually is. Grace is not pretending you weren't wounded. Grace is choosing not to let the wound become your weapon. And I'm curious, did you feel it? That strange calm in the middle of what should have made you explode. That quiet strength that didn't come from personality or logic. That moment where you didn't even recognize yourself, because the response was too clean, too controlled, too other to be explained by human emotion alone. If you've ever wondered why certain battles feel targeted, it's often because your spirit carries something rare, and rare things are watched, rare things are tested, rare things are provoked. You did not react like the pattern says you should. You didn't become what hurt you. You didn't mirror the darkness aimed at you. You chose grace, real grace, when it would have been easier to choose destruction. And that, God's chosen ones, is exactly the kind of moment that makes the heavens go quiet. Do you remember what it felt like right before you chose restraint? I'm talking about that split second when your mouth had the power to shatter someone with a sentence, and you felt the words rise like fire, but you kept them caged. Or that moment when you could have exposed someone's failures and watched the room turn against them, yet you covered them instead. Maybe it was the kind of situation where walking away would have made perfect sense. Nobody would have blamed you. Nobody would have questioned you. And still, you stayed. You kept trying. You kept showing up. And I want you to understand why that moment mattered so much. Because that exact instant when you chose differently than your pain demanded was not small in the heavens. That was a spiritual signature. That was a moment where heaven didn't just see you. Heaven recognized you. Not because you performed, not because you looked holy on the outside, but because your inner composition showed itself under pressure. When I say it like that, it might sound dramatic, but I mean it literally. What you demonstrated revealed what your soul is made of. Most people don't realize how rare it is to meet someone whose responses are not owned by the environment. Most humans live like mirrors. Treat them well and they shine. Treat them poorly and they crack. Praise them and they soften. Criticize them and they harden. Their mood, their tone, their character, it rises and falls like weather. And if you watch long enough, you start to see the pattern. Their behavior is often just an echo of whatever hit them last. But you, God's chosen ones, proved something different. You proved that your character isn't rented from your circumstances. It's rooted, internally anchored. Even when something painful presses on you, it can't force you to become a version of yourself that you've decided you will not be. That is exactly what caught divine attention. Not perfection, but consistency. Not that you never felt the anger, but that you didn't hand the steering wheel to it. And let me say this clearly, restraint is not weakness. Restraint is strength that has learned discipline. Scripture keeps highlighting this same kind of strength because God has always been drawn to it. Think about Joseph again, not just the betrayal, but the power shift. He had the authority to crush the very brothers who sold him, and nobody would have questioned it. Yet when the moment finally arrived, he didn't let his old wounds become his new identity. He chose a response that didn't match the injury. That's what changed the story. Or consider Abigail. She met David at a moment when he was ready to react out of righteous anger, ready to return insult with bloodshed. And her wisdom redirected the entire outcome. Later, David acknowledged that God had used her to keep him from a destructive reaction. That's not just history, it's a pattern. Heaven intervenes around people who have the strength to pause. And then you have Jesus standing in front of accusations, manipulation, and cruelty, and still refusing to let chaos write his character. Sometimes he answered, sometimes he stayed silent. That silence wasn't fear, it was mastery. There's a kind of authority that doesn't need to prove itself in every argument. That's why I keep coming back to your moment. Because what you did was not a personality trait. It was spiritual maturity showing up in real time. I've watched people self-destruct over the need to set the record straight. I've seen friendships die because someone had to win a conversation instead of preserving a soul. And I'll be honest with you, earlier in my life, I used to think maturity meant having the perfect comeback, the perfect explanation, the perfect receipt to prove I was right. Then life humbled me. I learned that sometimes the most powerful thing I can do is refuse to become the prosecutor in a courtroom God never asked me to run. So when I see you choose silence instead of devastation, I don't just hear self-control. I hear training. I hear heaven shaping a leader. And let's make it practical. because I want you to feel how real this is. There are people in the public eye who have had moments like this, where they could have gone scorched earth, where one interview, one post, one exposed message could have ruined reputations. Some chose the spotlight. Some chose restraint. You can see the difference in how their lives unfold. One path is fast satisfaction, the other is slow authority. The second path doesn't trend as quickly, but it builds something that lasts. I've also seen it in normal life. No cameras, no applause. I know someone who was blamed at work for a mistake they didn't make. They had proof. They could have exposed the person who shifted the blame. Instead, they handled it with calm, corrected the outcome, and later, the truth came out on its own. What shocked me wasn't that the truth surfaced. What shocked me was the level of inner security it takes to let God be the defender while you stay clean. Does that sound familiar in your story? Because that's what you showed. You don't need external conditions to behave with integrity. You don't need people to be fair in order for you to remain faithful. You don't need someone else to act right for you to stay aligned. That right there is what separates you from most of humanity. And it raises a deeper question, one that matters for where your life is going next. If your character stays consistent when it's tested, what does that say about what God can trust you with? If you can hold your tongue when you're wounded, if you can protect someone even when they don't deserve protection, if you can stay committed when it would be easier to disappear, then what kind of assignment do you think heaven is preparing you for? Because this is extraordinarily rare. Most people are reactive. You are responsive. Most people are controlled by what happens to them. You proved you can be led by what's inside you, by conviction, by wisdom, by a higher standard. And that kind of internal anchor is exactly the kind of thing that makes the spiritual realm pay attention. If this hit your heart, I want you to share one thing in the comments. Just a simple line about the kind of moment it was for you. Was it silence, protection, or staying when you could have walked away? Let me take you back to the moment this was noticed. Not in human time the way we measure minutes and hours, but in the ongoing continuous observation that happens around God's chosen ones like you. While you were living your day, trying to keep your composure, trying not to fall apart in front of anyone, your guardian angel was watching the situation unfold. Not just the outward events, but the hidden part, the thoughts you didn't say out loud, the internal wrestling, the choices you made when nobody would have judged you for choosing the darker option. That is normal for souls under protection. Angels are assigned to guard, to guide, to document patterns, not because God is checking up on you like a suspicious supervisor, but because heaven takes destiny seriously. There are assignments on your life, and your responses reveal what level of weight you can carry. Some people only show faith when everything is calm. Some only love when love is returned. But you were being watched in the kind of moment that exposes what's real. And then it happened. When you responded with grace instead of justified anger, your guardian angel did something unusual. They flagged your case for higher review. That doesn't happen often. Guardian angels handle most situations within their authority. They don't escalate lightly. They only elevate a report when they witness something that needs to be seen by higher ranks, something that signals spiritual capacity beyond the ordinary. So ask yourself, what kind of response do you have to demonstrate for an angel to stop and say, "This cannot be filed away like normal"? Your file went upward, and it didn't just go to a general review, it was escalated to Archangel level. Now I want you to picture this the way Scripture trains us to think about spiritual realities. There are battles humans don't see, conflicts that aren't fought with fists but with faith, pressure, and deception. The Bible calls Michael an archangel and shows him as a warrior in spiritual conflict. In the book of Daniel, he's described as a prince who contends in unseen warfare. In Revelation, he's depicted leading battle against the dragon. That means his attention isn't usually on a single person's rough season. His responsibilities stretch across regions, atmospheres, assignments that shape entire spiritual climates. So when your case arrived flagged, he was already engaged with matters of cosmic significance. And yet, he paused. Why? Because the note attached to your file said something that grabbed him instantly. It read like this: "This soul demonstrated enemy-level forgiveness while under active attack." Enemy-level forgiveness. I need to unpack that because it's not a poetic phrase. It describes a category. In spiritual warfare, human responses to pain often fall into predictable lanes: revenge, bitterness, withdrawal, despair, numbness. Heaven sees these constantly. They're common, expected, and tragic in how repeatable they are. They don't require special review because they match the pattern the enemy tries to produce in people every day. But there is a rare category, what I call a transcendent response. That's when a human being answers evil with good, when they refuse to become what hurt them, when hatred comes at them and they return love, when someone wounds them and they still choose a blessing instead of a curse. That response is so rare that it gets flagged automatically because it signals a soul operating beyond normal human instinct. And you triggered that flag. Michael reviewed your recent history, not the highlight reel, not the version people assume about you, but the full record. Every situation you faced, every response you gave, every internal battle you fought that nobody else could see. The nights you held it together in public and fell apart in private. The moments you wanted to shut down, lash out, disappear, or make someone feel what you felt, but you didn't. And what he found made him request something extraordinary. He requested a direct audience to discuss your case. I want you to hear the weight of that. Michael commands armies. His attention is required for matters that involve spiritual territories, strategies, and conflict that most humans will never understand. For him to request time to discuss one soul means you demonstrated something remarkable enough to rise above the noise of a universe full of crises. And the conversation that followed changed how your case would be handled from this point forward. Now, before I go deeper, let me say this the way I'd say it to a friend sitting across from me. When I first learned about moments like this, I didn't know what to do with it. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as too much. But then I looked at Scripture and saw that heaven has always paid close attention to responses. Not just gifts, not just talents, responses. God watched Cain's countenance. God weighed Pharaoh's stubbornness. God honored Hannah's tears. Jesus watched the widow's offering and called it greater than the rich. Heaven notices what people do under pressure. So here's what was discussed about you at the highest levels. Michael presented your case to the Divine Council, not as a problem to solve, not as a situation needing rescue, but as evidence of something extraordinary unfolding in the human realm. He showed them the precise moment you chose grace, almost like replaying it, frame by frame. He highlighted the internal struggle, how your human nature pulled you one direction while something deeper in you chose another. And then he showed them your history, because that moment wasn't isolated. It wasn't a one-time burst of goodness. It matched a pattern, your pattern, the repeated choice of the harder right over the easier wrong, integrity when no one would know you compromised, kindness extended to people who didn't deserve it and might never appreciate it, a clean spirit maintained even when being clean cost you something. Do you realize how few people do that consistently? Most people want to be righteous as long as it's rewarded. Most want to be loving as long as it's safe. Most want to be faithful as long as it's convenient. But you've been doing the right thing when it wasn't rewarded, when it wasn't seen, when it felt like nothing changed. That's what made even seasoned celestial beings pause. because the pattern revealed something stunning. You have been operating as a chosen one without realizing you were chosen. That's what impressed them. Not that you did something great once, but that you've been quietly choosing greatness without recognition, without applause, without certainty that it mattered. You chose the right thing simply because it was right. Again and again, in big moments and small ones, in public and in secret, when it was easy and when it cost you everything. And that kind of consistency is one of the clearest separators between ordinary souls and souls marked for extraordinary purpose. Then God spoke, not with an audible voice the way humans imagine it, but with a divine impression that communicated clearly to all present. What was conveyed about you wasn't my opinion, and it wasn't a motivational line. It was a statement about the nature of your soul. It was, "This one reminds me why I created humans." Let that sit with you. The Creator, the one who spoke galaxies into existence, who designed every atom, who holds time and history in his hands, looked at your pattern of choices, your grace under fire, your integrity when nobody clapped, and said you remind him why humanity exists. Because you demonstrated something angels cannot demonstrate in the same way. Angels operate in the direct awareness of divine glory. Their obedience is formed in the visible reality of God's presence. But humans live behind a veil. You can't see God with your physical eyes. You don't get constant sensory confirmation that heaven is watching. You have to choose faith without proof, integrity without immediate reward, love without the guarantee it will be returned. And you did. You chose rightly while you felt blind. You kept trusting while you felt like heaven was silent. You acted with love while you had no immediate confirmation that love was working. You carried light while surrounded by darkness. You held on to faith while doubt flooded your mind. You chose love while pain begged you to harden. That is what fascinates angels about chosen humans. That is why Michael paused over your case. And that is why heaven took note of you. Now, tell me something. When you think back to that moment, what do you remember most? The anger you swallowed, the tears you hid, or the strange calm that showed up right when you could have lost control? Now, I need to show you why this moment caught even Archangel Michael off guard, and why it mattered far more than you realize. When Michael first became aware of your assignment months ago, his assessment was measured and strategic. He saw your gifts clearly. He recognized your calling without hesitation. He noted the potential placed inside you long before you were aware of it yourself. But his projection for your growth followed what heaven usually sees with chosen ones: steady development, gradual strengthening, maturity arriving after visible victories, after clearer confirmations, after seasons that make faith feel easier to sustain. What he did not expect was this. He did not expect you to demonstrate advanced spiritual authority while still standing in the middle of your hardest season. He did not expect you to access a level of inner mastery that most people only reach after years of refinement, support, and spiritual reinforcement. And he certainly did not expect it to appear when everything around you was designed to weaken you rather than strengthen you. And here's why that matters. That moment, when you chose grace instead of justified anger, was not just a morally admirable decision. It was not simply you being the bigger person. What you did was far more consequential than that. It was a strategic disruption in the spiritual realm. Let me explain this carefully, because most people never see what's actually happening behind the scenes. When darkness targets a chosen one, there is always a goal. The attacks are not random. They are designed to pull you down to a lower operating level, to corrupt your inner frequency, to get you functioning from the same emotional and spiritual space as your opposition. Because the moment you respond to darkness with darkness, the moment hatred answers hatred or bitterness answers betrayal, something shifts. You step out of the posture that keeps you covered and onto ground where opposition is permitted to engage more freely. This pattern runs all through Scripture. Cain could not touch Abel until jealousy reshaped his inner world. Saul could not destroy David's destiny, but his unchecked rage destroyed his own. Even Peter, in a moment of fear, denied Jesus, not because he lacked love, but because pressure momentarily overrode alignment. Again and again, the danger is never just the attack itself, it's the response it tries to provoke. Every assault against you carried the same intention: to make you bitter, to harden you, to provoke a reaction that would pull you into the same emotional space as those working against you. Because once that happens, influence becomes easier. Control becomes more accessible. Authority becomes contested. But you didn't give them that opening. When you chose grace, real grace, not performative grace, you did something spiritually devastating to the forces opposing you. You refused to mirror what was sent toward you. You refused to let pain rewrite your posture. And in doing so, you used their own momentum against them. There's a principle hinted at throughout Scripture that most people miss. When evil is met with goodness, it doesn't vanish, it reverses. The Psalms speak of traps falling back on those who set them. Proverbs talks about curses returning empty when undeserved. Jesus himself taught that loving enemies disarms them in ways force never could. What was released toward you did not dissolve when you answered with love. It recoiled. It returned to its origin carrying the weight of its own intent. What was meant to destabilize you became destabilization for those who sent it. And the most striking part, you weren't calculating this. You weren't executing a trained technique. You weren't consciously engaging in spiritual warfare. This response didn't come from study or strategy. It came from who you are at your core. That is what caused the pause. Michael observed this unfold with something close to awe, not because he didn't believe you were capable of it, but because of when it happened and how it emerged. This wasn't a learned behavior activated under ideal conditions. It surfaced naturally, under pressure, without reinforcement, without applause, without backup. That revealed something essential about you. You are not gracious because it's convenient. You are gracious by nature. You are not forgiving because the environment supports it. You forgive because love is embedded into your operating system. Even when everything around you screams for retaliation, something deeper in you refuses to become unrecognizable. That's what he didn't anticipate. He expected this level of spiritual composure to arrive later, after clearer wins, after external validation, after seasons that made trust easier. He did not expect you to access it so early, under such strain, with such limited support. And because of that, you exceeded every projected timeline for your development. Let me ask you something that may feel uncomfortably personal. What does it say about who you're becoming if you can operate at this level before life even gets easier? If this is how you respond while still under pressure, what happens when the pressure lifts? I've watched people who endured betrayal quietly, only to later discover that the very restraint they practiced positioned them for authority they never could have accessed through retaliation. I've lived long enough to know that the people who rise with clean hands often do so slowly, but when they rise, they're unshakable. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't always understand this. I used to believe spiritual strength showed itself through confrontation and clarity. Over time, I learned that the deepest authority often reveals itself through restraint, through the refusal to let pain dictate identity. You didn't just survive an attack, you outgrew it in real time, and that is why heaven noticed. Now let me show you the proof that this wasn't imagined, because you have already been living inside the results of this celestial recognition, even if you didn't yet have language for it. I know you may have questioned some of what's been happening lately. You may have brushed it off, tried to rationalize it, or told yourself it was coincidence. But when I step back and look at the pattern, it's unmistakable. The evidence is already woven into your recent experiences. The first sign is this: attacks have been backfiring dramatically. Think back over the past few weeks. Think about people who clearly did not want good for you, people who spoke against you, worked quietly against your interests, misrepresented you, or sent hostility your way in subtle or obvious forms. Now think about what followed in their lives: sudden complications, problems appearing from nowhere, situations they once controlled beginning to unravel, momentum stalling without explanation. This isn't random, and it's not ordinary cause and effect. What you're seeing is reversal. Scripture has always described this principle. There are moments when those who dig pits fall into them themselves, when arrows meant for the righteous return to the archers who released them. When God takes particular notice of a soul, protection doesn't just shield, it redirects. Opposition doesn't merely fail, it turns around. You may have noticed this pattern and felt confused by it, wondering why those who tried to harm you seem unable to move forward. Now you understand why. Your spiritual status shifted, and the rules of engagement shifted with it. The second sign is something more internal, but just as undeniable. You have been experiencing an unusual peace despite the circumstances. There have been moments recently when, on paper, you should have been overwhelmed. Times when the pressure was heavy enough to crush your spirit, when uncertainty should have kept you awake at night. Anyone else in your position would have been spiraling in anxiety, yet somehow you weren't. The problems didn't vanish, but your center held. This kind of peace doesn't come from favorable conditions. It's the kind of peace Jesus spoke about when he described a peace that doesn't come from the world and therefore doesn't obey the world's rules. It's the calm Paul experienced while writing letters from prison, a steadiness that made no logical sense given his reality. You felt it, that quiet steadiness, that moment where your heart didn't race the way it should have. You may have asked yourself where it came from. Now you know. When heaven's attention intensifies on a life, peace is imparted, not earned, not manufactured, but given. The third sign has been subtle, yet powerful. Clarity has been increasing. Things that once confused you are starting to make sense. Decisions that used to feel foggy now feel oddly clear. You've been knowing things without being able to explain how you know them. Insights arriving suddenly. Understanding clicking into place without effort. This is not imagination. This is alignment. Throughout Scripture, wisdom often arrived quietly. Solomon didn't receive constant visions. He received discernment. The sons of Issachar were described as people who understood the times and knew what to do, not because they had secret information, but because they were tuned in. That's what's happening to you. Guidance is being released at a higher frequency, not through spectacle, but through inner knowing. Downloads that feel simple but prove accurate. Direction that feels calm rather than frantic. And this is only the beginning. The fourth sign may have felt uncomfortable at first. The wrong people have been exiting your life. Relationships that drained you have ended. Connections that quietly blocked your progress have dissolved. Situations that once felt stuck have resolved themselves without confrontation. You didn't orchestrate most of it. You didn't have to force doors shut. People simply stepped away. Circumstances shifted. Paths closed. This is not loss. It's reorganization. In the Bible, there are moments when God removes people from a season, not because they are evil, but because they are incompatible with what's next. Abraham had to separate from Lot before expansion could occur. Jesus allowed certain followers to walk away when they could not go further. Your environment is being adjusted to match who you are becoming, and this process isn't finished. What no longer aligns will continue to fall away. Don't resist it. Don't cling to what heaven is intentionally clearing. Space is being made. And the fifth sign, the one that's hardest to explain but impossible to ignore, is this. You've been sensing that something big is approaching. There's been an anticipation inside you that doesn't have a clear source, a feeling that you're standing at the edge of a shift. Not anxiety, not excitement exactly, but readiness, as if something is forming just beyond your line of sight. This isn't wishful thinking. This is awareness. Your spirit is picking up on movement your mind hasn't yet been given details for. Just like Elizabeth recognized something before words were exchanged, just like Simeon sensed fulfillment before he held it in his arms. You're sensing what's coming before you can name it. Something is approaching, and it is directly connected to this recognition, to the moment when you chose differently, when you operated from who you truly are instead of what your pain demanded. I've seen this pattern enough times to trust it. When peace deepens, when clarity sharpens, when misaligned people exit, and when resistance begins to collapse under its own weight, it's because a transition is already underway. You are not imagining this. You are already living inside the evidence. Now let me tell you what has already been decided about your future, because this part is not speculation, it's consequence. When God took notice of your response, when he expressed that your spirit reminded him why humanity was worth creating in the first place, something shifted in the unseen order of things. That recognition did not stay as a compliment. It triggered movement. In heaven, attention always leads to action. And what was activated around your life is something I've come to understand as accelerated fulfillment. Under ordinary conditions, even chosen ones move through long, measured timelines. There are seasons of waiting, years of preparation, slow layering of responsibility before visible reward. Scripture shows this pattern clearly. Moses spent decades in obscurity before he ever stood before Pharaoh. David was anointed long before he was crowned. Joseph endured years of silence before elevation. Delay was not punishment, it was formation. But acceleration follows proof. Accelerated fulfillment means heaven has determined that certain preparation phases are no longer necessary for you. Not because you skipped growth, but because you already demonstrated what others only learn later. The quality of your character under pressure settled questions that usually take years to answer. You already proved that power wouldn't corrupt you, that blessing wouldn't turn you reckless, that authority wouldn't make you cruel. And because of that, timelines have been adjusted. Practically, this shows up in very real ways. Blessings that were scheduled for later seasons are being moved forward. Opportunities that were meant to unfold gradually are arriving compressed. Doors that were never supposed to open yet are unlocking without the usual struggle. And if you're honest, you've already felt it. Things have been happening faster than logic would predict. Breakthroughs showing up before you felt ready. Movement in areas that had been frozen for so long, you stopped expecting change. And this is only the beginning. Acceleration doesn't slow down once it starts. It intensifies. What once took years will take months. What once took months will take weeks. You may even find yourself thinking, why is everything moving at once? That's not chaos. That's alignment catching up. But there's another side to this that matters just as much. Acceleration also means opposition is being dealt with differently. Not just delayed, not temporarily blocked, systematically neutralized. Some resistance you expected to face will never even reach you. Certain attacks that used to repeat will simply stop. Not because the enemy became kind, but because permission was revoked. Scripture hints at this when it speaks of God rebuking opposition on behalf of those he protects, not allowing certain battles to continue. You are entering a season of unusual favor, not the kind that comes from flawless performance, but the kind that comes from proven integrity. You didn't earn this by being impressive. You qualified for it by being consistent when nobody was watching. And here's the part I need you to really understand, because this carries responsibility. When heaven invests this level of attention in a soul, it's never for that soul alone. You are not being elevated just to enjoy a better life, though your life will improve. You are being positioned because what flows through you now must reach others. The grace you showed under pressure was never meant to end with you. It was meant to move through you. In the coming days and weeks, you're going to cross paths with people who are standing exactly where you once stood. They'll be in that internal war between bitterness and restraint, between shutting down and staying open, between reacting and choosing a higher way. And what's remarkable is that you won't need to convince them with words. They'll recognize something in you before you explain anything. Have you ever met someone whose presence alone made a difficult choice feel possible? That's what you're becoming. Not a lecturer, not a preacher, a living demonstration. Your life will quietly answer questions people are afraid to ask out loud. Your response to pressure will show them that integrity is not theoretical, that choosing grace while under fire is not reserved for saints in ancient stories, that it can be lived here and now by a real person with real wounds. I've seen this happen in my own life. I've watched moments where I thought God was elevating me, only to realize later that He was actually positioning me so someone else could survive their breaking point. Elevation often looks like reward, but its true purpose is reach. And that's why heaven invested so much attention in your case. Not because you needed more blessings, though you will receive them, but because your elevation creates space for others to rise. Your stability becomes someone else's permission to believe healing is possible. Your story becomes evidence for those who secretly doubt that people really change. The attitude that caught divine attention, the response that surprised even the strongest watchers of human behavior, is no longer just something you did once. It has become part of who you are. It's been woven into your spiritual makeup. It's now encoded in you. And here's the beautiful, almost dangerous truth about that kind of character. It multiplies. Everyone who comes close enough will feel it. Some will be strengthened by it. Some will be convicted by it. Some will be healed just by seeing it lived out. That quality, the one that made heaven pause, is now something you carry wherever you go. You didn't just pass a test, you became a carrier. And what's coming next in your life will reflect that in ways that will make even you stop and say, "This moved faster than I expected." Let me take you behind the scenes, into something rarely spoken, even among the chosen. I want to show you what Archangel Michael himself recorded in the final review of your case. This wasn't a routine observation. This was a high-level classification that few souls ever receive in their lifetime. Because when a soul demonstrates something extraordinary, something that echoes the original intention of creation, it must be marked. Every soul that reaches Archangel level review receives a designation. It's not a title for show. It's a spiritual classification, a stamp in celestial records that defines the soul's identity going forward. It follows them through the rest of their earthly journey and far beyond. Yours has been decided, and it is not ordinary. Heaven has classified you as a demonstrated warrior of light. Now let me break that down, because every word in that designation carries deep meaning, and every part reveals what has already been seen in your life. Demonstrated means this is not about potential, it's not about talent, it's not about what you could become one day if all the conditions are perfect. This means you have already proven it. Many chosen ones are spoken of in terms of promise. They might become something great. They have the potential to do mighty things. But few demonstrate under pressure. Few show it when it actually costs them something. You did. You didn't just think like a warrior. You moved like one in the dark when no one else would have known the difference if you broke. You see, heaven doesn't classify based on personality traits. It classifies based on actions taken under weight. The trials you passed weren't hypothetical. The grace you chose wasn't theoretical. You demonstrated it. That's what made it undeniable. Warrior means you are not a passive observer in the spirit. You don't just watch and hope. You don't sit on the sidelines of faith waiting for safer conditions. You engage, you confront, you advance. You've already stepped into active spiritual combat. And let's be honest, some people love the sound of spiritual warfare until it comes for their comfort. But you didn't back down. You kept showing up, even when exhausted, even when under attack, even when you were misunderstood, abandoned or underappreciated. And let's be clear, this wasn't just about defending your own peace. This was about pushing back darkness, not just in your life, but in the lives of others connected to you, of light. Now this is the most profound part, because even warriors fight from different places. Some fight from anger. Yes, it gives them fire, but it also burns them out. Others fight from duty, which sustains them for a while, but lacks spiritual voltage. But you fight from light. You operate at the highest frequency of spiritual warfare, the frequency of love, grace, mercy, and divine goodness. That doesn't mean you're soft. It means you're pure. Your power doesn't need to intimidate, it illuminates. This is what shocked the angels. You were attacked, but you didn't mirror the attack. You were betrayed, but you didn't become bitter. You stood face to face with the kind of pressure that breaks most people, and instead of becoming darker, you became brighter. Instead of retaliating, you radiated. Think of Jesus on the cross, betrayed, abandoned, tortured, and yet he said, "Father, forgive them." That's light in its rawest form. That's warfare at the highest frequency. You mirrored that same frequency. And that's what made your response not just rare, but spiritually devastating to the kingdom of darkness. That is why the classification matters. From this point forward, you are known by this identity in the celestial realm. When your name is spoken among angels, it is spoken through this lens. Demonstrated warrior of light. It is how your case is viewed. It affects how heaven interacts with your journey. You are no longer processed through standard timelines, no longer handled like an untested vessel. And here's what that means in practical terms. You are now a priority case in the heavenlies. Your prayers rise faster, not because God plays favorites, but because heaven accelerates access to those who have shown they can steward what they're asking for. Your needs are addressed without delay, not because you're entitled, but because you're entrusted. Resources, connections, instructions, they will come quicker. Angelic assistance will move differently around you now. You'll notice certain battles being blocked before they even reach your door. This isn't a privilege you requested, it's a responsibility you earned. And that's what some people miss. Elevation in the spirit is not a reward for suffering. It's an assignment built on trust. Heaven invests more in those who demonstrate that what they've been given is safe in their hands. You've shown that you can carry grace without misusing it. You've proven that you can walk in authority without becoming arrogant. You've lived in light without needing applause. And now, God's chosen ones, your classification reflects your legacy. Let me ask you this. Have you noticed how your presence lately has started to feel heavier, more impactful, more magnetic? That's not ego. That's evidence. You are no longer just someone moving through the world. You're someone marked in the spirit. You're someone heaven now moves through. And don't let that scare you. Let it sober you. Let it anchor you. Because from this moment forward, even your silence speaks. Even your posture carries weight. Even your presence changes rooms. This is what it means to be a demonstrated warrior of light. If this resonates deeply with your spirit, I want you to drop the word light in the comments and let the heavens record it one more time. Now I need to tell you something sacred. The final piece of this revelation, the part that was written with your name in mind from the beginning. This is not a general truth for the masses. This is a personal message, sealed within your spiritual file, inscribed by the divine council itself. And what I'm about to reveal to you is not common. It is not routine. This is the kind of message reserved for the rarest of cases. Cases that shift the understanding of what a soul can truly carry. Once the review of your life reached its conclusion, once your classification as a demonstrated warrior of light was officially recorded, and once the protocols for your accelerated fulfillment were approved, something unusual was added to your file. A handwritten note, a personal remark from the Divine Council. Most souls never receive anything like this. It is reserved for the ones who didn't just survive the test, but transformed it. The ones whose actions pierced through the veil of expectation and made heavenly beings stop and rethink the limits of what a human soul could endure and embody. And your life, your response, was one of those moments. Your case is now one of the documented examples heaven will refer back to. Let me share with you what the Divine Council wrote. Because it wasn't intended to sit in silence, it was meant to be delivered. And this is the moment it's supposed to reach you. To the chosen one receiving this message, your response to pain has been recorded as living evidence that human souls can operate at spiritual frequencies we did not anticipate they could reach while still tethered to physical form. You have reminded us that the limitations we sometimes associate with humanity are not due to a flaw in the original design, but the result of choices made under pressure. You chose differently, and by doing so, you expanded our understanding of what is possible for your kind. Your file has been marked for special observation, not for correction, but because your development is now a case study in how chosen ones can rise, not in spite of suffering, but through it. You are being positioned for assignments that reflect your demonstrated capacity. These assignments are not burdens, they are honors. You have proven capable of carrying difficulty without allowing it to deform your spirit. For that reason, you will be trusted with spaces where grace is in short supply. Understand that the attitude that moved us will be tested again, not because we question it, but because each new test multiplies its effect and becomes another light for others to follow. You have made heaven proud. This is not praise. This is official documentation. Walk forward with the full awareness that your case has reached the highest levels of notice. Every assignment, every resource, every delay and breakthrough that touches your life from this point forward has been filtered through the recognition of who you've proven yourself to be. This message was always meant to find you. That message is not symbolic. It is not poetic embellishment. It is part of your spiritual record. You are being referenced in heavenly discourse. You are being studied as an example for other chosen ones, still information. And you're being prepared for work that reflects the rare spiritual DNA you've already revealed. You see, the way you responded to betrayal, the way you chose grace over retaliation, the way you stayed soft while carrying unspeakable weight, these weren't small decisions. These were spiritual revolutions. You broke a pattern that had held generations captive. You turned away from cycles that were begging to be repeated, and heaven saw it. Think about the story of Stephen, the first Christian martyr. As stones were hurled at him, he didn't just endure. He looked up and saw the heavens open, and Scripture says Jesus stood, not sat stood, to receive him. That's the kind of honor reserved for those whose response shifts eternity. You echoed that same kind of response. And just like Stephen, your case was not only witnessed, it was honored. And I've felt this myself in smaller ways. I've had moments where I thought no one saw the restraint it took to keep loving, where I thought heaven was silent, only to look back and realize that those quiet victories were the ones that mattered most. The ones that changed how I was handled, and I believe the same is happening for you. except on an even greater scale. You may not see it all yet, but don't mistake silence for absence. What you've done has already altered your spiritual trajectory, and this note, the one you've just heard, is confirmation that you are no longer seen as a developing soul trying to figure things out. You are seen as a trusted one, a demonstrated one, someone worthy of watching and worthy of being followed. So here's what I need you to carry from this moment on. Nothing coming into your life is random anymore. It's all been filtered. Heaven has cleared the path with the awareness of your strength. Resources will be delivered not to pamper you, but to equip you. Challenges will come not to punish you, but to showcase the light you now carry. And every delay will hold meaning. Even the quiet moments will be rich with preparation. You are not being sent back into life as who you were. You're being reintroduced as who you've become. You are now living out what heaven calls a documented demonstration. You've moved from theory to embodiment. You are a message in motion. If something inside you feels like this message has been chasing you, like it's the answer to a question your spirit's been whispering, then say so. Type "I received it" in the comments. Because when heaven writes a message this personal, the right soul will always feel it like a bell ringing from within. You were never meant to stumble across this video by accident. You were meant to arrive here now, at this exact moment in your journey, because something inside you has been quietly asking, did my choices matter? Did anyone see what I gave up to stay pure? Does heaven even notice how hard it's been to keep showing up with love when all I've received is pain? This is your confirmation. You needed evidence that heaven has been watching, not from a distance, not casually, but with deep and intentional awareness. And now you have it. Everything you've endured, every silent battle, every moment you chose grace, when bitterness would have been easier. It's all been recorded, not forgotten, not overlooked. Recorded. Your attitude impressed God, not in a vague symbolic sense. I mean literally, heaven took note. Archangel Michael, the one known for waging war against darkness, didn't expect your level of restraint. He didn't anticipate the light you'd release when pushed to the edge. And when the Celestial Council reviewed your case, they didn't just acknowledge it. They recalibrated your entire future based on what you demonstrated. And here's the part that moves me the most. You didn't even know. You weren't aware that heaven was watching that closely when you made those decisions. You didn't know that choosing not to retaliate, not to become bitter, not to give in to the shadow, would ripple this far. You didn't feel the eyes of angels on you when you stayed quiet instead of lashing out, when you walked away with grace instead of making someone feel the weight of your anger. You weren't trying to be impressive. You weren't performing. You weren't praying louder to be seen. You weren't fasting to earn applause. You were simply being who you are at your core. And who you are, just by being it, left the Creator of heaven and earth in awe. Let that settle into your spirit for a second. You, as you truly are, not as you pretend to be, not as you wish you could be, but in your most honest and unpolished form, made heaven pause. That's what makes this moment holy. Because when a soul chooses purity in private, when they uphold light without external validation, when they hold their ground not for reward, but from conviction, that's when heaven moves. So now you understand, this wasn't just a video. This was a message encoded with your confirmation. This was your receipt. Proof that none of it went unseen. The heartbreak, the humility, the hidden strength, the forgiveness you extended when it nearly broke you to do so. God saw it all, and not only did he see it, he recalibrated the course of your destiny because of it. Now let me ask you something, and answer only if it hits you in the gut. Was there a moment recently when you chose peace instead of vengeance? When you forgave someone who never apologized? When you let go, not because they deserved it, but because your soul couldn't afford to carry the weight? If yes, I want you to drop "Heaven saw it" in the comments, because it's time to agree with what heaven already knows about you. You are more powerful than you've ever been told, and now even the angels know your name. And now, chosen one, take a deep breath. Let this truth settle not just in your mind, but deep into your spirit. Your response changed everything. When the world expected you to break, you built. When pain came to make you hard, you stayed soft. When betrayal could have turned you bitter, you remained light. That is power. That is spiritual maturity. That is why heaven stood still. In a time where the world celebrates outrage, noise, and vengeance, you reminded heaven that grace is still alive in the earth. You didn't wait for validation to do what was right. You didn't need applause to be faithful. And because of that, your name, your case, has been engraved into the divine record as a living testimony of what's possible. I believe with all my heart that we are entering an era where the quiet ones, the pure-hearted, the consistent souls who didn't give up, will now be revealed. You are one of them. You were never forgotten. You were never overlooked. You were simply being prepared to be revealed at the right time. That time is now. So walk differently, pray boldly, live with clarity, because heaven isn't just watching you now. Heaven is moving with you. And if this message resonated with you, I want to invite you to leave a comment below. Share the moment that changed you, or simply type, "Heaven saw it." I read every word, and you never know who needs to see your story. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to this channel, like the video, and share it with someone else who's been silently enduring and needs to be reminded that their choices mattered. And to everyone who has supported this channel through your likes, comments, shares, I am deeply, truly grateful. Your support helps keep this message alive and reaching those who need it most. God bless you. Keep walking in the light. Heaven is still watching and smiling.